What I'd like to do is talk about HEVC versus AV1. A lot of people have been interested in this subject. The AV1 standards very much come from left field players. For those of you familiar with broadcast standardization, broadcast video compression has always been MPEG or related standards. And AV1 has come firmly as a standard from the streaming community, enterprise network, trying to sort of encompass the requirements that they have rather than just focusing on video compression. So what I'd like to do first and foremost is go through the current options for video head ends. A little bit about the evaluation criteria that people use. Why AV1's good for OTT applications. And you see I demoted the most exciting subject, namely royalties, to fourth, because everyone expects me to go straight in there. But no doubt about it, the royalties issue is the main one that a lot of people are focusing on. Talk a little bit about coding structure, but Ed wouldn't really have a presentation slot if I went into detail in there, so I'll just give you a little sniff as to what the difference between HEVC and AV1 are. And then most importantly, talk about performance and conclusions. I'll try and make sure I leave enough time for questions, but both the presentations that Ed and I are doing are both quite technical. We're around all today and in the evening if you have any questions to ask. So I suppose the first issue actually is what are the current options for video head ends, and sort of why people are considering using AV1. It's fairly true to say that for most applications, people are considering cloud for OpEx and CapEx reasons. I put it like that because the industry's in a state of flux at the moment. Most legacy deployments on product or appliance, they're eyeing up software encoding, and they're also eyeing up sort of public, private, and hybrid cloud. But it's not a slam dunk that everyone's porting things to the cloud. Some people are very much there, and their first questions that they're asking you are AWS-based or server-based, sort of what kind of cloud strategies you have, and so forth. But by and large, I think a lot of our clients are very much in a state of flux in this area. So I think that it's fairly true to say that most people are really in a mixed infrastructure where they're looking at applications through to virtualization. It's true to say also that the market favors the newcomers into the market, and by that I mean the people who are after file and transcoding applications. And that's really where a lot of the expectation for what's in file and transcoding and VOD services to actually be emulated within the live environment. But no doubt about it, the real-time encoding and streaming is still a challenge. If you want to do that at any sense of scale for any low latency sports applications, it's still a challenge there. And there's a huge variation in terms of head-end deployments. But there is a universal endorsement for software. So it's a very strange market out there. You only have to go to IBC and NAB to get a feeling for that. But the one thing that I would say is that all the systems that people are commissioning, there's very much an emphasis that 5 years ago people were saying we want a live linear system that we put OTT and catch-up on. Now it's the other way around. People are very much looking and saying the value add is in the VOD and catch-up, and we also want it to perform live. So it's flipped on its head. In terms of the evaluation criteria, and I don't want anyone having a heart attack in the morning, I have absolutely no plans to go through the flow diagram. For those of you who are interested in a comparison of HEVC and AV1, I will be doing a technical paper at IBC that'll go into the tool sets and all of the technical detail. But for this, I think that first of all, if you're looking at any of the video compression schemes, you have to look at the evaluation criteria, and they are different than, say, the linear DTH criteria that we've got. Functionality first. One of the things, I mean, Ed and I were talking about this before, and I wish I'd thought about it before I put these slides together, instead of just putting functionality and saying people are looking at it from an IT skill set, is search and discovery. That's a fairly clear requirement. Reliability, security. Security is a big issue now. Most people are saying their whole value chain collapses, and with ubiquitous access on the internet, that's what a lot of people have concerns on. And then the area that used to be the big one for linear deployments is performance. I will talk about VQ. I've got some results to talk about that we've been working on. But performance is not just about video quality. The whole issue about compute density and compute efficiency are really, really important now. Operability, monitoring and control, and then the other ones that people are really interested in, particularly with new standards, concerns total cost of ownership and time to market. I said that AV1 had really been crafted with OTT in mind. For those of you who don't know the history of AV1, it basically came about from VP9. The VP9 standard was also developed primarily for streaming applications. And as you can see here, that the approach is more about containerization, media file formats, RTP, Dash. But as Ed quite rightly points out, it's search and discovery that a lot of people are interested in. One other thing that a lot of people are looking to AV1 to do is address some of the issues to do with HDR and wide color gamut for 4K. So I suppose there are three areas that AV1 is being evaluated on. One is video quality and performance. One is the OTT aspect of it and better tuned for streaming application, and the other one is for new format requirements like 4K and UHD. There's a quick summary of where it is in terms of the containerization and in terms of the various protocols that are commonly used. You see that a lot of the things like CMAF, HLS, they're yet to be developed. So it's not fully formed yet in terms of the requirements, but it's nearly there and it's doing very well. One thing that is causing most discussion and most people are examining is the issue about HEVC royalties. All MPEG standards have had a very, very rough time because they're expensive to develop. People put a lot of R&D resource into it. And HEVC's had a particularly rough time because there are a lot of people who are in various different pools. As you see, there are three main pools here, plus a whole load of people who are actually outside of the existing pools. So if you like, they are a threat where they could actually say, we do have intellectual property that is actually included within HEVC. And I think it's the fact that this has dragged on for quite some time, the fact that they were actually trying to change the licensing model for HEVC, where it was more related to usage and more appropriate towards software encoders rather than hardware encoders, where it was actually trying to achieve an awful lot. Plus, it had a lot of disparate people with royalty claims that has really caused problems. Not so much for the really big players, because they've got enough traction in the marketplace that they can forge ahead where they've got enough IPR of their own to actually trade in. But for the smaller players and for people who are making technology decisions, like the content suppliers, it really is a difficult area. So AV1 came around, and it was actually developed by the Alliance for Open Media. It's supposed to be interoperable and open, and by that I mean one of the prerequisites is that if you give your technology in for that standard to actually be included, you won't you're giving up your rights to actually later claim royalties on it. And in fact, one of the main emphasis is that if there are challenges, AV1 actually has a scheme in place to actually defend its position. And a large amount of what it's doing in terms of evaluation is basically saying, is this technology what it purports to be, and do the people who are saying that they've got the IPR actually own it? And there are big players behind that. The aims of it, it's supposed to achieve roughly 25% over current codecs, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And it is supposed to be an all things to all men type encoding solution, like HEVC was, where it'll go from mobile up to 4K. And as I mentioned earlier, it is supposed to include a high dynamic range and wide color gamut. And for those of you who are up sweating your night in hotel rooms, eagerly looking at the BBC News, you'll see that things like the BBC iPlayer have made an announcement where they're actually planning on streaming 4K HDR wide color gamut. So in terms of those requirements and sort of this inclusion, that whilst a lot of people equate the streaming as lower formats to 4K, the higher end formats and the fact that it does actually have an answer to how to actually handle high dynamic range and wide color gamut is, gives the standard considerable traction. In terms of who's actually supporting it, things would have been difficult without Apple supporting it. And the reason why I highlight Apple separately is that up until fairly recently, they didn't provide an endorsement either for HEVC and AV1, and now they do. And I think that a lot of the other speakers were saying, oh, I'm really looking forward to what you're going to say about AV1, because people tend to sort of be quite polarized, where this is the best standard to come along, this offers 25 to 50% better video quality. And what I'm firmly saying is it doesn't offer that, and I've got results to actually back that up. But we are genuinely moving into a stage where video compression is more of a commodity, and whereas previous compression standards had to have a 50% performance improvement with a similar compute resource being used, AV1's criteria is slightly different, and we'll talk about that in a minute. As I mentioned, and this is probably the most frightening slide early in the morning, so we won't have it up for long, I will be doing a presentation at IBC that goes into all of the coding structure, and I'll turn it into a white paper for those of you who won't make it to Amsterdam. The only point that I'm trying to make here is that some of the techniques that are used between HEVC and AV1 are similar. They're similar and different. I'll also say that the MPEG standards don't stand still, and if you actually look online, there are actually really three aspects that you should be considering. HEVC, which is the current standard, GEM, which is a future proposal standard that has actually got some performance metrics out, and then AV1. So as I said earlier, I won't go into detail on that, but I will be presenting at IBC a detailed paper that talks about the tool sets and talks about the various advantages to the tools. One other thing that I think that is really coming to the fore is the difference in terms of content providers' expectations for video encoding. It used to be that used to do objective tests on video compression, and those results would be final. And I think that what people are now doing is there's a subtle shift away from live linear criteria, in other words, using objective techniques to get a mathematical figure behind compression formats, to actually more subjective, what does this actually look like? And this term, sort of content adaptive streaming, and the whole idea of actually using quality indexes actually comes to play, particularly where people are looking at different profiles. Now, what you'll find is that everyone's compression engine is more orientated towards this rather than verbatim implementation of a particular tool set. A lot of people are very much looking at the subjective performance, so that they're basically looking at, sort of really three things: the type of content, the type of profile, and the type of bandwidth that's actually available to them. There are more parameters that are actually considered, but this is a fundamental difference in the way that people are actually driving encoding engines, to say that we are more interested in the real-world subjective picture quality than previously when we've been interested in the objective aspects of it. In terms of what people are really interested in, the three areas are CDN savings. People are interested in scale and reach, and whereas video quality used to be this particular video quality for this objective measure at this particular bit rate, what people are really saying is, I want to see 30% saving in terms of CDN cost. They are looking for improved quality of experience, and yes, that involves video quality, but it also involves buffering and start time. And then the other thing is the money end of the equation, which is dynamic ad insertion and so forth. So a lot of people are looking both at live and file applications. They are also interested in techniques that are actually looking to refine content and make decisions on the fly from, if you like, a dictionary of content, whereby a lot of the video encoding algorithms are actually based on artificial intelligence. So that's just somebody jumping on a buzzword, but basically where they've actually encoded content, be it sports, animation, episodic material, there's an awful lot that they can use as a dictionary to actually guide how a video encoder works. And then the other things that are more applicable for network type display are the things about variable chunk sizes, which are particularly associated with streaming type applications. Now, moving quickly on, and I hope I'll be clawing back sometime. Oh, look, I've been given the 5-minute sign. So I'll get rid of my 2 slides. Look at that, it magically happened. I'll get rid of these next 2 slides so that you can ask some questions if you want to. I was hoping to actually go, the standard's actually been finalized, but as of last week, I think there are still some things to do with the syntax. So it's actually expected to be mid-2018. You will see people with hardware models for AV1 at IBC, but I'm really expecting more mature approaches to it to be 2019, 2020. I thought I'd jump to the chase on this and show you 3 examples before we conclude today, that I can come up with cases where AV1 is visually better than AVC or HEVC. In this particular case, what we're supposed to emphasize is the detail in the dancer's face. You can also look at some things to do with edge rendering, where this is at a fairly aggressive bit rate in terms of 1 megabit, and AV1's at the top and HEVC's at the bottom. You can all say, this guy's like a magician, because all he's doing is spooling through content, pressing stop, and coming up with user cases that just work. So this is a case where it doesn't work, where in this case, if you actually look at HEVC, versus AV1, you see the AV1 is blurred, defocused, whereas HEVC is a lot clearer. And that's exactly the stance that I take on AV1 and HEVC. For conditional access and DRM, we are told by our customers what to implement, and I'm expecting that to be far more of a situation for video compression, where it's actually sort of dictated by the kind of networks that you're playing out to. Now, this is just one sort of snapshot where if you actually do an objective model between AV1 and HEVC, there's very little to call between the two. And in fact, actually, there's a lot of work to be done on AV1 because compute efficiency and runtime, it's not been optimized nearly to the extent that HEVC has been optimized. So there's a lot of work to be done. So most likely you will see file and transcoding applications that are offline appear way before anyone tries to do a live implementation for sort of low latency sports. So in conclusion, and hopefully staying to time and keeping Eric and everyone happy, there's wide industry support for a royalty-free video compression scheme. It's promising in terms of video quality, but I have concerns about runtime and processing footprint that are actually required. If you also look at the other things, that it really is compression tuned for primarily OTT type applications, but it does have benefits for UHD in terms of high dynamic range and wide color gamut. The crucial thing is that the area where it's looking to scale is on CDN costs and trying to drive the costs down and be more suitable for those kind of streaming applications. And for us as a vendor, as a TEM, a lot of people are expecting it to see a battle where there's a clear winner and a loser in this, and I don't actually see it there, because I think that a lot of people are going to start off with either AVC or HEVC now, and then move to AV1 as the players start to become more commonplace. So that's it from me. Thank you very much for listening.